Older animated villains had an aura that spoke for itself. Their presence alone was enough to give you chills. But instead of terrifying icons, we started getting last-minute twist villains or misunderstood antagonists who just need one emotional conversation to make things right. And sometimes we don't even get villains at all.
Bruh.
So today, let's break down why villains don't have aura anymore. To do that, we need to go back to the era of animated villains with actual presence. For a long time, Disney was basically the final boss of that entire category. Take Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Even her first appearance comes with green fog and flames that make everyone in the room hold their breath.
She shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and die.
This woman shows up to a christening with the energy of someone who always wants to throw hands. I mean, you would think she had a valid reason to curse an actual baby, but no, it's only because she wasn't invited to the party.
Access denied.
Maleficent is just petty, powerful, and fully committed to making her bad mood everyone else's problem. And with her arsenal of dark magic, she feels almost impossible to stop. Her biggest aura moment, though, comes when Prince Philip finally gets close to saving Aurora.
And all the powers of hell!
Everything about her, from her design to the dialogue, perfectly captures your attention, much like Ursula from The Little Mermaid.
You pitiful, insignificant fool!
Look out!
Unlike Maleficent, Ursula doesn't rely on intimidation alone. Her real weapon is manipulation. Instead of just attacking Ariel, she learns about her deepest wish and uses it to trick her into signing a contract that puts her world in jeopardy. Ursula uses that same contract against King Triton, forcing him to give up his crown and trident to save his daughter. So while Ursula going full sea kaiju is terrifying, her real power is knowing how to con people through their weakest emotions. But Disney wasn't only great at monsters and magical con artists. The studio also knew how to create human villains who were somehow worse than the actual demons.
And he shall smite the wicked and plunge them into the fiery pit.
Judge Claude Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame is horrifying because he's painfully real. He's a powerful religious authority who believes every horrible thing he does is morally justified. This man even tries to drown a baby in a well and acts like he's doing God's work.
Jesus Christ.
Disney, therefore, mastered the art of creating villains who were just cruel and power-hungry without reason. What made this era even stronger is that villains sometimes had tragic backstories. Their pain, however, didn't excuse their terrible actions, and DreamWorks gave us the perfect example with Ramesses from The Prince of Egypt.
And there shall be a great cry in all of Egypt, such as never has been or ever will be again.
I mean, there's no coming back.
Ramesses is undoubtedly monstrous in this film. He enslaves an entire group of people, and his pride makes him refuse every chance to show mercy. But the film first introduces him as Moses' brother. Growing up, they share a close-knit bond that makes his eventual cruelty feel even more tragic. Over time, Ramesses becomes a product of his father's expectations, constantly afraid of becoming the weak link in a dynasty built on power. So when Moses asks him to free his people, Ramesses hears a threat to his entire identity, which is why he turns against the brother he once loved. Ramesses chooses pride over mercy again and again, even when it costs him his own son. What makes him tragic is that we understand the cage he was raised in, but that still doesn't excuse his cruelty. That's what older animated villains did so well. No matter how much we understood them, they were still undoubtedly the bad guys. Which is why it feels strange that studios today have moved so far away from villains who genuinely enjoy being bad. Instead, modern animated films lean more towards twist villains, misunderstood antagonists, redeemed enemies, or no villains at all. Again, that's not inherently bad. Some stories genuinely work better without a traditional villain, and Encanto is one of them.
I don't know why you weren't given a gift, but it is not an excuse for you to hurt this family.
In this film, the real conflict comes from Abuela's pressure on the family and the generational trauma she passes down without realizing it. So yes, a movie can absolutely work without an enormous sea witch. But for comparison's sake, that kind of conflict doesn't create the same aura as a villain who genuinely enjoys causing misery. And the biggest shift in villainy comes from Disney in particular. This was once the studio that gave us Frollo trying to burn down Paris and Scar murdering his brother without a flinch.
You just not gonna say anything no more?
Now, there always needs to be a reason for a villain's actions. Although that's not a problem in itself, it doesn't really work unless the character is written well. Which is how we get to King Magnifico from Wish.
Mirrors, mirrors on the wall, who is the handsomest? Me!
Right off the bat, Magnifico actually has the ingredients for a strong modern villain. His story could have been simple. A king loses everything because of selfish people, builds a kingdom where he promises to protect people's wishes, and slowly becomes so terrified of losing control that he turns into the very thing he feared. But instead of letting Magnifico gradually descend into paranoia, the film throws in the evil book and basically lets dark magic speedrun his villain arc. And that's where the modern villain problem really begins. A lot of these characters have the outline of something interesting, but the story either makes them too soft or the writing doesn't do them justice. Namari from Raya and the Last Dragon is another example.
Thank you, Debla. You've been very helpful.
On paper, Namari could have been a great misunderstood antagonist. She has a personal connection to Raya and enough battle aura to make every fight scene look incredible. The problem, however, is that the writers try to redeem Namari even though she's done nothing to earn it. She betrays Raya, helps create the mess everyone spends years suffering from, and somehow the film expects Raya to trust her for the greater good. Sure, Disney was clearly trying to say that trust matters even when it's difficult, but without accountability, that message is toxic. Namari, therefore, could have worked better if she had either remained a true villain or we had seen more of her inner conflict over the terrible things she did. The most frustrating part is that modern animation knows how to write sympathetic villains without redeeming them. The audience can understand those characters without feeling the need to forgive their actions. Misunderstood antagonists, though, aren't the only trend animated villains lean towards lately. We also have the twist villain era, where the film started trading aura for shock value.
Fear always works, and I'll dart every predator in Zootopia to keep it that way.
Conceptually, Dawn Bellwether from Zootopia is a smart villain because she fits the movie's themes about prejudice and fear. Unfortunately, she barely has a presence for most of the film. Since the twist depends on us underestimating her, she's designed to be small and forgettable, which of course makes sense for the story, but it also dampens her aura. Now, it doesn't mean twist villains can never have aura, since Pixar achieved this with Ernesto de la Cruz in Coco. But in that case, Ernesto worked because he already had presence as a celebrity before he was exposed. Other twist villains, however, don't get that luxury. That ultimately is the trade-off modern animation keeps making. Studios have become more interested in emotional complexity and twist reveals than in creating villains with aura. And because of that, the old charm of animated villains feels so much further away now, especially from Disney. Maybe Disney thinks there's no audience for pure evil villains anymore. But later in this video, I'm gonna debunk that theory. Although Disney has definitely fallen off in the villain game, it's not the only studio struggling with this problem. And it becomes especially obvious when studios start making sequels. To be fair, sequels already have a harder job than the original. They have to expand the world to continue the hero's journey and somehow create a villain who's worthy of standing next to the previous villain. Sometimes they pull it off. Other times, the villain feels weaker or is replaced by emotional conflict. And unfortunately, Kung Fu Panda 4 is one of the clearest examples. This franchise had an incredible villain streak. Each one challenged Poe differently and was tied to a major part of his growth. Then Kung Fu Panda 4 gave us the chameleon.
I grew. I excelled. And I got everything I had ever dreamed of.
Honestly, when your entire villain identity is copying other characters who are more interesting than you, you're already
Losing aura points.
Plus, she doesn't feel like a direct opponent to Poe as much as a direct opponent to Zhen. And while there's nothing wrong with that, the emotional weight feels weaker because Zhen is also a new character that we're not attached to. So when DreamWorks gives us a villain who mostly exists to push the new character's arc forward, it feels like a missed opportunity. But the sequel downgrade isn't always about giving us a weak villain. Sometimes the sequel barely has a villain at all, like in Ralph Breaks the Internet. In the first film, King Candy and Turbo had actual presence, and the twist worked because the villain had been hiding in plain sight. The sequel, meanwhile, skips a traditional villain and focuses on Ralph and Vanellope's friendship as she tries to figure out what she wants in life. That could have worked, but unfortunately, the writers made Ralph so needy and clingy that he feels like he got factory reset to his worst possible setting.
I wouldn't have done anything if I hadn't heard you tell Shank that you wanted to live in Slaughter Race forever.
In the sequel, Ralph puts an actual virus into the game Vanellope wants to join because he's afraid of losing her friendship. And he barely even apologizes for it. Instead of building a strong new villain, the movie turns Ralph's worst impulses into the main threat. And that might have been interesting if it hadn't damaged so much of his growth from Wreck-It Ralph. Sadly, this isn't the first time Disney's done that in a sequel. In Mulan 2, the main conflict doesn't come from a classic villain, but from Mushu being unbelievably selfish.
Yeah, just enough time to stop Mulan from making the biggest mistake of her life.
Mushu is scared that Mulan marrying Shang will make him lose his place as her guardian, and so he actively tries to sabotage their relationship. Which is frustrating because it completely undoes his growth from the original film. So while the first film gave us Shan Yu, an aura-maxing warlord, the sequel gives us a selfish lizard more worried about his pedestal than Mulan's happiness.
That's not fair! That's not fair!
To be clear, a sequel doesn't always need a bigger villain just for the sake of it. But when older franchises have given us villains like Tai Lung, Shen, Shan Yu, and King Candy, the downgrade becomes impossible to ignore. If sequels have a habit of watering down villainy, though, then live-action remakes take that problem even further. For the past decade, Disney has been turning its animated classics into live-action films, and to be fair, not every remake is bad. Maleficent, for instance, takes one of Disney's most iconic villains and gives her a tragic backstory, turning her into more of a misunderstood anti-hero than a pure villain. And even though this version isn't evil for the sake of it like the animated classic, she definitely has aura with her horns, wings, and dark magic. Unfortunately, not every live-action remake does well, which brings us to Snow White.
No. No.
Once the live-action Disney film came out, the reception was rough. And sure, there are several reasons for that, from actor controversies to visual choices, but for this video, we need to focus on the villain. At first glance, this version had potential. The crown, the cloak, and the overall look at least understood that the evil queen should feel cold and royal. But costumes can only carry a villain so far. At some point, the performance comes into play.
We take them and make pies, then go out into the village.
Pies are luxuries. They don't need luxuries. It confuses them.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
But even if we ignore the writing for now, the delivery also feels stiff. Instead of sounding terrifying, a lot of Gal Gadot's scenes come across unintentionally funny, which is terrible for a villain who's supposed to command the room. The original Evil Queen was cold and detached, but every word still carried weight. This version, meanwhile, keeps leaning into awkward line readings and exaggerated expressions, especially during her villain song. And don't even get me started on one of her most iconic bad deliveries in the film.
Are you against me too?
Are you?
Yes or no?
I once heard someone say she sounds like Scooby-Doo here, and honestly,
I can't unhear it.
Yeah, there's cookies.
Are you?
Yeah.
this live-action evil queen therefore proves that if the writing and performance don't work together, everything that was once iconic becomes flat. But while Disney seems stuck trying to repurpose its past, other studios have proven to be the exceptions that still manage to get modern villains right. Take Sony's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That movie doesn't just give us one strong villain, it gives us several different villain types at once, and somehow all of them work. First, there's Kingpin, who establishes his ruthlessness the moment he murders Peter Parker without flinching. Later, we find out that he lost his wife and son in a car crash after they discovered his criminal life and ran away from him. Since then, his goal has been to use the Collider to bring back another version of his family. That motive is tragic, but grief doesn't allow you to tear open the multiverse willy-nilly, and the one helping him do this is Doc Ock. At first, Olivia Octavia seems like a quirky scientist with chaotic energy. Then the arms come out, and suddenly she becomes one of the most dangerous people in the film. Unlike Kingpin, Doc Ock doesn't have some tragic motive behind her villainy. She's just brilliant and willing to do whatever it takes for her experiment. The most impactful villain in the movie, however, is Prowler. For most of the film, he's Kingpin's terrifying lackey, chasing Miles down and following orders without hesitation. And even with barely any dialogue, his presence alone is enough to give you chills. But the twist changes everything.
The kid's out there. I'll find them.
You know me, sir.
This is when we find out the Prowler was actually Miles' uncle Aaron all along. Aaron is ruthless when he's following Kingpin's orders, but the second he realizes the new Spider-Man is Miles, he hesitates for the first time. And that's how you make a villain complicated without diminishing their aura. DreamWorks pulls off something similar with Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Just like Spider-Verse, this movie gives us multiple types of villains who all serve a different purpose. First, we have Jack Horner.
You're an irredeemable monster!
What took you so long, idiot?
Jack Horner is the kind of villain who's bad and he knows it. He treats his henchmen like disposable napkins and makes even the ethical bug give up on him. But The Last Wish also gives us Goldilocks and the Three Bears, who start as criminals chasing the wishing star. Goldie wants the wish because she thinks finding her real family will finally complete her life. But by the end, she helps Puss and his friends against Jack Horner, becoming the redeemed antagonist. Goldie realizes the family she keeps wanting has been beside her all along, making her redemption feel earned. And finally, the film also gives us the ultimate villain. Death is one of the best modern animated villains, period. From the moment he appears, everything about him screams aura. The whistle, the red eyes, the sickles, even Puss, a character who has spent his whole life laughing in Death's face, looks genuinely terrified. Although Death is supposed to be a neutral force, he comes after Puss personally because the feline hero wasted 8 of his 9 lives. The film, therefore, becomes about Puss learning to value his final life, with Death only letting up once he sees that change. So in the end, both Sony and DreamWorks prove that the problem was never that modern audiences can't handle true villains anymore. The real issue is when studios water down their villains instead of letting them aura max to the extreme.